Welcome back to the March for Unity, Civility, and Political Engagement, where we build better bridges between communities through listening, learning, and sympathizing. I'm Simi Hundal, your host. Many of us Americans know of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that allowed 800,000 undocumented dreamers to live and work in the US free from fear of deportation. However, how many of us have heard about the dilemma of documented dreamers? Well, we're going to talk about just that today. I'm going to turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves. Vrinda, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Vrinda, and I am currently a software engineer. I live in the greater Boston area, and I am a documented dreamer.
Thank you, Vrinda. Dr. Trehan, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Nidhi Trehan. I'm based in Austin. I'm a political sociologist. Basically, I've been specializing in political mobilization of minority groups. That's my area. I recently found out, and I was very surprised about the situation of documented dreamers. So I'm happy to be here today with several documented dreamers. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Deep.
Thank you for having us. My name is Deep Patel. I am currently a pharmacist near Chicago, Illinois, and also the founder of Improve the Dream. We are a youth-led organization supporting and advocating for this important cause where over 200,000 children of long-term visa holders are in this situation. And we're just hoping to get a permanent solution to the situation soon.
Great. Let's jump right into it. You already touched on it, Deep, but couldn't you expand on documented dreamers? Where do they come from? How old are they? Who are they?
So there's a few different reasons why documented dreamers exist, but essentially documented dreamers are children of visa holders that are brought here at a young age. They grow up here, they're raised and educated here, but because of lack of pathways to citizenship in our immigration system, they don't have a way to permanently stay and become Americans. And I think that fact is something that most Americans wouldn't really believe because, while growing up and even talking to others right now, it seems that most people just assume that if someone is brought here at a young age or someone's brought here with some sort of a legal status, there's always a way to eventually become a green card holder or a citizen. But unfortunately, that's not true. And there's two main reasons this happens. One is because even for many immigrants who have applied for green cards, because of decade-long green card backlogs, which are caused by per country caps, outdated per country caps, which disproportionately affects Indians, it leads to children of those immigrants aging out of the system at 21 before the parents get a green card. And the parents might not get a green card for several decades. So when those children age out, they're going to be kicked out of line. Essentially, all their time spent growing up in the country rendered useless, and they could be forced to go back to their country of birth. Another reason this happens is because some immigrants who come here actually don't even have a pathway to citizenship. So my parents came here on a E2 visa, which allowed them to start a small business. But unfortunately, because of the parameters around that visa, they can keep extending their status, but unfortunately can't adjust to become a citizen. So children also age out at 21 under those visas. So this results in a situation where now we have approximately 250,000 young people who only know America as home. They've always had a legal status. Unfortunately, we're left out of the DACA program because of the requirement to have been undocumented in there. And the majority of whom are of Indian origin. Approximately 75 to 80% of those 250,000 are of Indian origin. So this is something that's very important that a lot of people don't know about, and it's very important to our community. Just a few other statistics based on Improve the Dreams survey amongst our community. We found that the average age we were brought here was at the age of 5, and we've been here for over 12 years on average, And about 90% of us are either pursuing or have completed a STEM degree.
These are some impressive figures, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, young people that are facing self-deportation. What is the current status of legislation on this issue?
The current status, so for the first time, and I just want to back up a little bit, historically, whenever there was legislation addressing children or dreamers, this population was left out in the past. Over the last decade, there were so many attempts, but this particular issue was never addressed. For the first time last year, after years of advocating, we were able to get a bipartisan bill called America's Children Act, introduced both in the House and the Senate, and it has broad bipartisan support. It would end aging out, fix a loophole which causes that, as well as create a mechanism that allows children who grow up here, have been here for at least 10 years, and graduate from an American university to be able to become permanent residents and citizens. Now, you might say that sounds like something that should already exist. And I think most Americans really do think that's a policy that already exists. So all it would do is make that into a reality. That has been introduced both in the House and the Senate. We've also had someone who has testified both in a student testified to the House Judiciary Committee representing Improve the Dream, then earlier this year to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is a big deal. And Texas Senator John Cornyn was a part of that as well. And we got a lot of support, from the senators after that hearing, as well as, the ongoing efforts. And that's led to a smaller provision based off of the America's Children Act that was passed recently in the House as a part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a must-pass bill. It's a really big bill for the country's defense and national security. And we're making the argument that this is something that really affects America's national security, and it's important. And that's why it was able to pass with good support in the House. And in the coming weeks, there could be a vote on it in the Senate as well.
That's exciting. It's an important time for this issue. How long does it currently take for H-1B visa holders to obtain citizenship? You also mentioned a couple of other visa holders. Could you talk about that as well?
So I can speak in regards to the
Vrinda.
H-1B because, as Deep's parents came on the E-2 visa, but my parents, I was in the different category of being on my parents came here on an H-1B visa. And currently, people have estimated that it can take decades. People have said somewhere between 50 to 150 years. Those are the numbers that we've been told. So essentially, currently, if you were to apply for, an employment-based green card through, coming here on an H-1B visa, then your employer files for your green card through that. And if you were born in India, you can be facing today, multiple decades long line. And if you have young kids, then they'll end up in a situation similar to ours.
Wow. And how long has this been an issue for these visa dreamers or documented dreamers?
So I think that this issue has existed for a long time. I've met a lot of people who are, in their 30s right now, and they said that they didn't know this. And so I think because the E-2 visa, for example, doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship, I think people have been quietly aging out, potentially quietly self-deporting for many decades now. But the reason I think that this issue has gotten so much traction is just the sheer population has increased so much, specifically because I think the green card backlogs are a decade, really, at least for the Indian community, they didn't exist significantly until, a decade ago. And so when those backlogs, significantly increased, the population of documented dreamers has just skyrocketed.
Makes sense why it's coming to a head right now. What is the current path to citizenship for documented dreamers? Can, for example, H-1B visa holders apply on behalf of their children to become citizens?
The paths are not very, there's not a lot of legal pathways to citizenship, because for example, I can use myself as an example. For me, the only realistic pathway to citizenship would be through marriage. And that's it, because I am now subject to the same per country caps that my parents were subjected to. So as a software engineer, my company was willing to sponsor an H-1B for me. However, that's based off of an actual arbitrary lottery. So my chances of staying in the country have come down to luck. And even if I win the lottery, I will be put into that same line. And that's like I said, 100 to 150-year line. So even though I have done everything by the book and have tried to apply and tried to get a job here and have a company that's willing to sponsor me both for an H-1B visa and for a green card, I still have no certainty and no pathway to citizenship, or no realistic pathway to citizenship at all through employment.
You've talked about the NDAA previously, the bill that's being put in front of the Senate. Is this you see as the best case scenario for your issue, is it being passed in the Senate as is?
So the best case scenario would be having the legislation, the bipartisan bill, America's Children Act, become law. But the goal really is to pass what can be passed in the current moment. And just because of what the political dynamics are, the provision that was passed in the House and will come up potentially for a vote in the Senate soon, those age out protection provisions will help a lot of people, and it will end aging out as we know it. So children will no longer be forced to leave when they turn 21. They won't be kicked out of their parents' green card line. So that is the best chance as far as something that can actually pass immediately, since it's one vote away from potentially becoming law. And so that is the best chance. And then I also just wanted to add on, just expand a little bit on what Vrinda had said about H-1Bs and the children who are sponsored. So all of these, the majority of these children, especially all of them who are children of H-1B visa holders, they are sponsored for a green card. So when their parents applied for a green card, they are on the same application as their parents. But current immigration law says that you can only be considered as a dependent child of a parent's application until you're 21 years old. Now, when those laws were written several decades ago, they didn't take into account that there would be backlogs that would last decades long. However, there always has been the notion of aging out. It's just that they didn't really look into it and think like, oh, there's going to be lots of children who grow up here as Americans and not have a way to stay. But as Rinda said, realistically, what ends up happening is when we end up, if we're lucky enough to end up staying, obtain a student visa, graduate from college, unless we're lucky enough to get sponsored, we have to end up leaving the country. And even if we do get sponsored, we're now going to be in the same green card backlog that our parents were in. So it's this limbo that will never end unless really the only pathway currently to become a citizen for most of these individuals will be to marry an American citizens. And it's possible for a long time. That's why this has been ignored, because many parents have accepted that as the solution or the only solution. But I think people are starting to realize that that's not acceptable as really the only pathway to citizenship.
I would also like to add something else to what Deep was talking about with regards to, say, marriage. Even if you want to talk about marriage, most people these days don't get really married at the age of 21. And one of the things we found is the biggest barrier to, this whole age out thing and, to being able to stay past the age of 21 is, when you age out and are forced to, switch over to that student visa. A student visa is, I like to call it a very dangerous or scary visa to be on. That's how I'm on I'm on a student visa myself right now, actually. And it's really scary because it's a single intention visa, which means when you apply for it, you have to prove what's called ties to your home country. And that is something that documented dreamers struggle with. We don't have ties to our home countries. We consider America to be our home country. I have lived in outside of India for now, it's been 17 years. And, so, they have every plausible reason to deny me this visa. I was very lucky that I got it. I consider myself very fortunate. So, but, what happens if that visa gets denied? Then you have to leave at 21. And that's another big problem is that because of the lack of, the fact that the F1 is not a dual intent, but a single intention visa, that can cause deportations right away when people turn 21.
Simi, I just wanted to add something. So I have experience in Europe working on refugee and immigration issues there. And when we compare what Vrinda and Deep are talking about, there are examples of other countries that have a more generous policy for young adults in their situation. So for example, I'd like to go back to the issue of genuine links. Clearly, the documented dreamers have genuine links to this country, far more than the country of their birth. And secondly, just to emphasize or reiterate what Deep said, that a huge number, a vast majority are STEM folks, and they're already making, Vrinda as an example, contributions to the US economy. So for these reasons alone, in other countries, like in some European countries, they would already be on a pathway to citizenship, or maybe Australia or Canada. So in that sense, it's a little bit of an anomaly what we have here in the United States. Just wanted to add that point. Thank you.
You're one step ahead of me. That was one of my questions. I appreciate you sharing that. Can you speak, you've talked about the issue and your stance on the issue, and I think that it's a very strong stance, and it makes sense to me. What about those that do not see it that way? What are some other stated oppositions to this legislation?
Deep, did you want to address that, since you probably have?
Yes, I can definitely, yes. So in general, the biggest opposition that we've faced really has been unrelated to the underlying policy. It's more so that the current political dynamics, where there's one party will say that there's a situation at the border right now that is affecting, a lot of aspects of our immigration system. Unfortunately for us, it is unrelated, or it's not directly related to this situation where children are aging out. But it often everything kind of gets tied together. So if there's issues with border security, it results in barriers for reform such as this from happening. And that's been a challenge in showing that this is something that's unrelated and actually is something that actually helps our national security, because forcing children who are American raised and educated, and again, as we said earlier, how almost 90% of us are in the STEM fields and contributing to the country, that only ends up hurting our country, hurting America and our national security. So that's the argument we've been trying to make and show why this is so important. Really not just for us and the families and the communities, but really just the country as a whole. Other than that, one other aspect could be why only this part of the system? Why not other aspects of the broken system that also need to be fixed? And that's definitely true. I think the country needs comprehensive reform, so many different parts of the system can be fixed, including like all dreamers and other aspects. But something that's important to note is that in the past, especially the last 10 years, even when there has been comprehensive solution, this particular problem of aging out was never properly addressed. When during President Obama's administration, when the DACA program came out, this specific population was left out. So we're just hoping to at least get some relief where possible. And then when there is a chance to get more comprehensive immigration reform completed, hopefully all of those other aspects can be solved as well.
On that note, do you have you learned lessons from those that have gone through this path previously, say DACA, say those that have pushed forward with the act that the bill that you just mentioned with under President Obama? What support have you seen from that community? And are you able to take some best practices from what they've accomplished?
I think we, in general, there has been collaboration. There's been many from all communities, you know, on a bipartisan basis from different organizations, community leaders, getting support from them. And I think it's seeing what has worked in the past, you know, grassroots advocacy, sharing stories, all of those things are taking into account. But just to share some background on like when I first started advocating about 5 years ago, my number one really goal was to find others who may be in this situation, and then, you know, trying to get more people reaching out to the our senators, our members of Congresses. But even before that, I had you know, I had attempted in connecting with many organizations who were already working on this. And the hardest part was showing that this is a big enough of a concern for, you know, even the existing organizations to take seriously. Because this was a concern even back in 2012. And, you know, there were members of the administration aware of this. The problem was that there weren't enough people talking about it. There weren't enough people reaching out about it and sharing their stories about why this is so important. So, you know, that's what led us to try and you know, continue advocating and seeing what is working for others, but then working with them as it's possible.
Why we've talked about this prior to actually hitting the record button too, as well as you mentioned it here. Why do you think awareness about this issue has been so low? We even talked about it within the South Asian community. Even those that are documented dreamers, they may not know of many others that are documented dreamers. Why do you think awareness is so low?
Well, for me, I think that awareness is low for a couple of key reasons. First of all, it's because you know, I think that, as I think Deep mentioned, I want to echo that statement, is I think a lot of parents are very concerned about their kids, but they do sort of think that maybe they'll get married and then the situation might go away. I think that that might contribute to some people saying, all right, there is at least that path. And other times, you know, at least with my parents, they were very hopeful of me getting sponsored and other things like that, but not knowing the hurdles I'd be facing even within that sponsorship. And all of those things. And I think that just the biggest thing is that I think population also is like size matters as well. Like as I'd mentioned earlier, this situation with the green card backlogs has been so exacerbated, and it's gotten worse over the past decade or so, to the point where it's become such a massive, like, you know, as you said, hundreds of thousands of people have been affected. And I think that when you have those numbers, more and more people can come out and start talking about the problem.
So I'd just like to add to that. So I've been involved as a volunteer for Desi Blue, which is a you know, South Asian political mobilization NGO. And over the course of the last 3-4 years with Desi Blue, I've met hundreds of Indian American activists. I've been in touch with many NGOs, and you know, myself, you know, having come here to Texas since 1982, I can tell you that there is very, very little awareness in the Indian American community. And I personally was quite shocked about that. But as a sociologist, I would say two things. One is that it kind of shows us the maturity of the Indian American community in terms of where we are as you know, involved in the political process, either as players sort of understanding about you know, the importance of policy that affects our community. So for example, immigration policy, and Deep absolutely mentioned about the comprehensive immigration reform And when we look at this, the plight, I will call it the plight of the documented dreamers today, it's one piece of the puzzle. And for me, I mean, honestly, if I can speak colloquially, it's like a no-brainer. Documented dreamers should have been on a pathway to becoming regularized, American citizens at some point earlier. And now we have this huge backlog. And I'm not too familiar with what happened to the policy of documented dreamers under the Trump administration. Vrinda and Deep could speak to that. You'd mentioned Obama earlier, Deep, but the fact is that the bipartisan pathway is the way to go. And for the reasons mentioned earlier, the contributions to US society, the genuine links, again, for me, it's a no-brainer. And we need to amplify this in our community, in the diaspora, and really up the ante. And Deep pointed out Senator Cornyn's office. Yes, and Senator Cornyn considers himself a friend of India, and he has very strong links with our community in Texas, being a long-term sort of, state senator. Senator, U.S. senator, and he's very open, I think, to this. So I really hope that he will take, his office will take this seriously.
For citizens that sympathize with this issue, what do you ask to do? What do you ask them to do?
Currently, we have, if they visit improvethedream.org, and on there's a few actions that they can take. The first of which is a automated letter that we've created. If they, it's a letter explaining that they support this and why this is important to them and the state. And it takes about 30 seconds to fill out, just with their information, and it gets auto-transmitted to the senators. So no matter which state you are filling that out from, it'll get transmitted to the senator's office. And then it'll also take you to a page that shows you what number you can call to leave a message for the senator. Those are two actions we're urging everyone who wants to support us to take. So sending that letter, and then making a quick phone call to Senator Cornyn and whichever state you happen to be from. In addition to that, also sharing that link and sharing that action with others in the community, especially in the Indian community. And that would be very helpful, because numbers do matter. And if we have hundreds or thousands of people who care about this reaching out to the senators, it can help us in this final push over the next few weeks.
In terms of resources for other documented dreamers, where would you point them to? Are there resources on Improve the Dream or otherwise?
Yeah, there's actually, I mean, I think Improve the Dream has done an amazing job, at providing a lot of resources to documented dreamers. The biggest one I can think of is, legal support, for example. That's something that a lot of people face, because when we are aging out, for example, what that would entail is, for example, somebody going on a dependent visa to potentially going on an international student's visa. So we have, we have like a wonderful lawyers team that's like working to help people. We've also provided mental health support and like wellness sessions for people who are struggling with the uncertainty of being in the situation of not necessarily knowing where you might be next year, or whether or not you might get deported or not. So that kind of support has also been provided.
That's great. Well, I'm going to move towards the last segment of the program. This has been very informative, and your stories are inspiring. Thank you for sharing so much. Thank you, listeners, aka Marchers. I appreciate the encouragement, feedback, and questions. Please consider rating the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. Our program was produced by Mariam Nabani. Guest panelists, thank you so much again for sharing your time in your busy schedules. I'm going to give you one last opportunity to speak, to offer a 60-second plug, maybe even something you want to say directly to the senators that are considering the bill in the next few days. The floor is yours. Why don't we start with Vrinda?
Well, first of all, Simi, thank you so much for having me on. And I know that you are also very busy, so thank you for this. And if I had to speak to everyone, including the senators or any person listening, I would just say that first of all, I think that where we can take the wins, we should take them. If we can even, I like to say, if I can save one person from deportation from this country, I would do it in a heartbeat. So, that's why I think that this solution in the NDAA is so important. We're permanently going to end aging out. It's going to permanently end the uncertainty. When people are supposed to turn 21, they're supposed to have a great time, but instead they turn their 21st birthday becomes a nightmare. So we're trying to end that. And I really hope that we can, with your support, we can get this across the finish line. Please call your senators up and get this done. Visit improvethedream.org and let's make it happen.
Thank you, Vrinda. Dr. Trehan.
Thank you, Simi. Just wanted to reiterate and underline what Vrinda just said. I think it's really important for all of us in the Indian American community in particular to reach out to our senators. We are a great community that's made great contributions to this land. And it's time to really, I think, step up and do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Deep.
Thank you, Simi, for having us on and allowing us to speak to the audience. I would say to just imagine the over 250,000 children who have grown up here and just want to stay with their families, stay here and contribute to the only country they've known. There's over 10,000 of us that face self-deportation every year. And, every year it takes for this solution to pass, that's 10,000 additional people who are going to be forced to leave. So that really the time is now, and we could use everyone's help to take just a couple minutes out of their day to make a phone call, submit that letter, and also share this with at least one other person. I think if all of us do that, and all of us come together, there's nothing our community can't achieve.
Powerful. Thank you so much, all three of you, and so many more behind the scenes that I have not gotten a chance to meet. I'm thinking of y'all. You're inspiring and you're change makers. We'll be back with another episode shortly. Until then, Marchers.